This deep dive takes us to Örebro, Sweden,
Oh, yeah.
back in April 2023.
Okay.
And we've got police reports, court transcripts, even some international news coverage,
Wow.
all centered around this young woman named Saga Elnor.
Okay.
You'll see why this case, I think, really grabbed headlines, not just for the tragic crime itself,
Right.
but for what it revealed about these cultural pressures and the dark side of secrets.
Yeah, and what makes this case so compelling is it really does start like something right out of a crime drama. You've got Saga, 20 years old, 7 months pregnant, found dead in her apartment.
Oh, wow.
It was initially staged to look like a robbery, but as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a much more complex and disturbing story.
Right, and that story involves this guy, Mohammed Amin Ibrahim, known as Amin. He was Saga's boyfriend, the father of her child, but their relationship was totally shrouded in secrecy,
Yeah.
creating this breeding ground for tension and ultimately tragedy.
The secrecy stemmed from some pretty deep-rooted cultural anxieties. Amin's family was conservative Somali Muslim, and he was absolutely terrified of their reaction to him having a child out of wedlock.
Right.
Especially with Saga, who was Swedish and Christian.
Okay.
That fear of bringing shame on his family becomes a crucial element in understanding this case.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Imagine you're one of the first responders arriving on the scene. What's the initial impression?
Chaos, for sure.
Yeah.
The apartment's disheveled drawers or open belongings are strewn about.
Right.
It's a textbook staged robbery scene.
Okay.
But then you see Saga lifeless on the floor.
Oh, gosh.
A heavy marble tabletop pressed against her throat. A lamp cord loosely around her neck. Yeah. Just a brutal and deeply unsettling sight.
And while that staged robbery might have seemed convincing at first glance, experienced investigators would quickly start noticing inconsistencies, right?
Exactly. Nothing of real value was missing. No signs of forced entry. These were clear indicators that someone was trying to create a false narrative.
Right.
A diversion tactic to cover up something far more sinister.
So how did Amin become the prime suspect?
Well, initially it was all about opportunity and motive.
Okay.
Amin's phone records put him at Saga's apartment around the time of her death.
Right.
But then things get really interesting when you look at the text messages recovered from their phones.
Okay.
Saga had been confiding in friends, expressing fears about Amin's increasingly controlling behavior.
Wait, there were text messages between Amin and his friends too, weren't there?
There were.
Okay.
And they paint a very disturbing picture.
Oh, wow.
In one exchange, Amin actually asked a friend to kick Saga's belly, hoping to induce a miscarriage.
Oh, my God.
And investigators discovered his internet search history included queries like, can fetuses die from kicking?
It's chilling.
Yeah. This digital trail revealed a level of desperation and a chilling disregard for Saga and their unborn child.
So the digital footprint becomes this undeniable piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But what about physical evidence at the scene? Did forensics link Amin to the crime?
They absolutely did. The autopsy confirmed Saga's cause of death as strangulation, a method often seen in domestic homicides. And crucially, Amin's DNA was found under Saga's fingernails and on her clothing.
Right.
This became a major piece of evidence linking him directly to the crime.
So we've got a motive, the fear of family dishonor. We've got opportunity. Amin was at the scene. We've got physical evidence, his DNA. But was there anything else that struck investigators as suspicious about Amin's behavior?
Yes, his actions after Saga's death were bizarre, to say the least.
For real?
When police initially contacted him, he pretended not to know her address.
Wow.
He even started joking with the detectives, almost as if he was trying to appear nonchalant. And get this, he offered an alibi before they even questioned him about his whereabouts.
It's almost like he was trying too hard, like he was overcompensating.
Precisely. To investigators, this behavior screamed guilty conscience.
Right.
And to top it off, they discovered Amin had deleted all text messages and call logs from Saga, clearly attempting to erase any trace of their communication.
Wow.
Thankfully, investigators were able to retrieve those deleted messages, which, as we mentioned earlier, provided even more damning evidence against him.
So at this point, the case against Amin is looking pretty solid. Let's move on to the trial itself. What was the prosecution's main strategy in presenting their case?
The prosecution focused on the immense pressure Amin was facing, the suffocating weight of his family's expectations.
Okay.
They argued that as Saga's due date approached, the fear of exposure and the potential consequences became just overwhelming for him.
Right.
They presented him as this desperate man trapped in a web of his own making. And they claimed that he saw killing Saga and the baby as the only way out.
So essentially, they were arguing that Amin was driven to commit this horrific act by this extreme fear of disappointing his family, this deep-rooted sense of obligation to uphold their honor. But what about the defense? What was their counter-argument?
The defense's strategy was to create doubt to challenge the reliability of the evidence presented.
Okay.
They argued that while Amin was undoubtedly present at the scene, there was no direct evidence definitively proving he committed the murder.
Oh.
They claimed that the DNA found on Saga's body could have been from earlier consensual contact. And they insisted that Amin's cultural background and fear of family dishonor were not strong enough motives to justify such a brutal act.
Okay.
They even pointed to an unmatched footprint found at the crime scene, suggesting the possibility that someone else might have been involved.
So essentially, they tried to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative, casting doubt on the motive and suggesting alternative explanations for the evidence. It's fascinating how a case like this hinges on the interpretation of often ambiguous details.
It really is. And in this case, the jury ultimately had to decide whose interpretation of the evidence was more compelling, whose story they believed.
And as we know, the jury reached a verdict, but the impact of this case goes far beyond the courtroom walls. What were the broader implications, particularly in Swedish society? Stay tuned, because after a quick break, we'll be back to explore the aftermath and the lasting legacy of the Saga Elneborg case. All right. We've been laying out the facts of the Saga Elneborg case, but it's crucial to remember that this isn't just a collection of evidence and legal arguments.
Right.
This is a story about real people.
Yeah.
About a young woman whose life was tragically cut short, and about the ripple effects that spread outwards, impacting families and communities.
Absolutely. The courtroom may have delivered a verdict, but for those closest to Saga, the journey was far from over.
Right.
They were left to grapple with the overwhelming grief,
Yeah.
the unanswered questions, the sheer injustice of it all.
Let's start with Saga's mother, Melissa.
Okay.
She was the one who found Saga, who had to face that horrifying scene. Can you even begin to imagine the pain she must have endured?
It's almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
Not only did she lose her daughter, but also her unborn grandchild.
Right.
It was a double loss, a stolen future.
Hmm.
In interviews, Melissa has spoken candidly about the crushing weight of grief,
Yeah.
the waves of anger, the confusion that seemed to consume her.
It's one thing to lose a loved one to illness or an accident, but to have them taken from you in such a violent and senseless way, that adds a whole other layer of trauma to the grieving process.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And for Melissa, the grieving process wasn't private.
Right.
This case was everywhere, splashed across newspapers, debated on television, dissected on social media. She couldn't escape the constant reminders, the public scrutiny.
It's so easy to forget that behind every headline, every court case, there are real people whose lives are shattered.
Yeah.
We get caught up in the legal arguments, the forensic details, but ultimately this is about human lives, about families torn apart by tragedy.
And that's why it's crucial to acknowledge the human cost of these events. To remember that for Saga's family, this wasn't just a case to be solved. It was their life, their pain, their loss.
Did the guilty verdict, the fact that Amin was held accountable for his actions, did that offer any solace to Melissa? Did it provide any sense of closure?
I think for Melissa,
Yeah.
and likely for many who loved Saga's, the verdict brought a sense of justice being served. It confirmed that the person responsible was being held accountable for his actions. But closure, true closure, that's often an elusive concept for families impacted by murder.
Yeah.
The pain, the loss, it never truly goes away.
Yeah.
You learn to live with it, to carry it with you, but it's a wound that never fully heals.
And what about Amin's family? They've been largely absent from the public narrative surrounding this case. What impact do you think this tragedy had on them?
It's impossible to know for sure what they went through, but you can imagine the weight of shame, the disappointment they must have felt.
Yeah.
Their son convicted of such a brutal crime. It's a heavy burden to bear.
It circles back to that clash of cultures we discussed earlier.
Right.
The weight of expectations, the fear of judgment within their community. Did Amin's family ever speak publicly about the case about their son?
No, they remained silent throughout the entire ordeal. And in some ways, you can understand why they were thrust into the spotlight. Their private lives dissected and judged by the public. It must have been incredibly difficult for them to reconcile their cultural values, their sense of family loyalty, with the horrific reality of their son's actions.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers, but let's not forget the other victims in this tragedy. Saga's friends, the people who knew her best, who shared her laughter, her dreams, her hopes for the future. They lost a part of their lives that day too.
You're absolutely right. They were robbed of their friend, their chosen family.
Yeah.
And while they couldn't bring Saga back, they could ensure that her memory lived on.
And how did they do that? How did they honor her memory and cope with such a profound loss?
They became her voice, her advocates.
Okay.
They spoke at rallies, shared stories about her on social media, kept her name in the public consciousness. They reminded everyone that Saga was more than just a victim. She was a vibrant young woman with a bright future ahead of her. It's a testament to the power of friendship, the way we hold on to each other in the darkest of times, finding strength and solace in shared memories.
So even in the midst of this tragedy, there were glimmers of hope. The case ignited important conversations about domestic violence, about the need for better support systems for victims, about the complexities of cultural integration. It forced Swedish society to confront uncomfortable truths and to examine whether enough was being done to protect vulnerable individuals.
It did. And while it's impossible to undo the past, the hope is that Saga's story can serve as a catalyst for change, that it can lead to greater awareness, increased empathy, and a commitment to creating a society where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their background or beliefs.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in building that kind of society. To be aware of the signs of abuse, to listen without judgment, to speak up when we see injustice, and to offer support to those who need it most. We can't afford to be bystanders in the face of suffering.
That's a powerful message. We need to move beyond simply acknowledging the problem and start actively working towards solutions. That means supporting organizations that help victims of domestic violence, advocating for policies that protect vulnerable individuals, and fostering open dialogues that bridge cultural divides.
It's about creating a culture of empathy and understanding where differences are respected and everyone feels empowered to seek help when they need it. And sometimes it starts with simply listening to the stories of those who have been impacted by these tragedies, allowing their experiences to inform our actions and inspire us to create a better future.
That's a profound point. We can learn so much from the stories of survivors, from the families who have been left to pick up the pieces. Their voices can guide us towards a more compassionate and just world.
We've delved into the evidence, the motives, the cultural nuances of the Saga Elneborg case. We've explored the impact on those closest to her, the pain and resilience of her loved ones. But this case also raises broader questions about individual responsibility, societal expectations, and the often blurred lines between cultural sensitivity and the protection of basic human rights. Stay with us as we continue our deep dive exploring the legal and ethical considerations that this case brought to the forefront. We've been unpacking this Saga Elneborg case, this intricate web of secrets and cultural clashes, and ultimately this devastating act of violence. But a case like this, it doesn't just end with a courtroom verdict. The ripple affects the human cost. That's what we want to focus on now.
Yeah, you're right. The legal system delivered justice. But for Saga's family and friends, their journey was far from over. They were left to pick up the pieces to navigate the grief and trauma, to try and make sense of this senseless act.
As we dig deeper into the aftermath, it becomes clear that Saga's case wasn't just a personal tragedy. It became this lightning rod in Swedish society, sparking a nationwide debate about several crucial issues.
Exactly. This case forced Sweden to look inward, to examine its own systems and cultural assumptions. It ignited these discussions about domestic violence, the effectiveness of support systems for women in abusive relationships, and the sometimes challenging intersection of cultural sensitivity and the protection of fundamental human rights.
Let's start with the topic of domestic violence. Did Saga's case lead to any tangible changes in how Sweden addresses this issue?
It did. You see, in Sweden, there's this strong emphasis on individual autonomy and privacy.
Yeah.
But this case highlighted the potential blind spots in that approach. The focus shifted towards recognizing the patterns of coercive control, which is a form of domestic abuse that involves a systematic pattern of manipulation, intimidation, and isolation.
So Saga's case helped bring this often hidden form of abuse into the spotlight. But did it result in any concrete policy changes?
Yeah, it did. Lawmakers began to reevaluate existing legislation, looking for ways to strengthen protections for victims of domestic violence. There was a push to make coercive control a specific criminal offense, recognizing the devastating impact it can have on victims.
That's a significant step. It shows how a tragic case like this can actually lead to positive change, to a strengthening of the safety net for those at risk.
It also sparked a national conversation about the adequacy of support systems for women experiencing abuse. Organizations like shelters and hotlines saw an increase in demand, and there was a greater focus on providing culturally sensitive support, recognizing that women from different backgrounds might face unique barriers when seeking help.
So in a way, Saga's case became a catalyst for greater awareness, prompting society to take a hard look at how it responds to domestic violence, particularly within diverse communities.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about addressing the immediate crisis, but also about prevention. There was this renewed emphasis on educating young people about healthy relationships, about recognizing the red flags of abusive behavior, and about fostering a culture of respect and equality.
It's about shifting the conversation from reaction to prevention, about equipping individuals with the knowledge and tools to build healthy relationships and to seek help when needed.
Exactly. And that's where the intersection of cultural sensitivity and human rights comes into play. Sweden, like many countries, prides itself on being multicultural and tolerant. But this case highlighted the need to find a balance to ensure that cultural practices are respected while also upholding the fundamental rights of all individuals, especially when it comes to safety and autonomy.
It's a delicate balance, and there's no easy answer. But by acknowledging the complexities and engaging in open, honest conversations, we can move towards a society that values both diversity and the protection of individual rights. We've talked about the broader societal impact, but let's circle back to the individuals whose lives were forever altered by this tragedy. We've heard about Melissa's strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. But what about Saga's friends, the people who shared her laughter, her dreams, her everyday moments? How did they navigate the grief and find a way to honor her memory?
Saga's friends became her torchbearers, keeping her spirit alive through their actions and their words. They organized memorial events, shared stories about her on social media, and spoke out against domestic violence. Their grief was palpable, but it was channeled into a powerful force for change.
They chose to turn their pain into purpose, transforming their grief into a call for action. It's a testament to the power of human connection, the way we find strength in shared experiences, even in the darkest of times.
And that's the enduring legacy of the Saga Elneborg case. It's a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence, but it's also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows us that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there's hope. Hope for change, hope for justice, hope for a future where stories like Saga's are no longer repeated.
It's a powerful message, and it's a call to action for all of us to be aware, to be compassionate, to stand up for what's right, and to offer support to those in need. Because ultimately, creating a safer, more just world starts with each and every one of us. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Saga Elner case. It's a story that stays with you, a reminder that sometimes the darkest corners of humanity are found in the most unexpected places. But it's also a story of resilience, of the power of community, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember to check out our show notes for further reading and resources. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.